back to the channel. This is going to be a video showing how to use the composition API to create a composable to manage state. So the problem we're trying to solve is the traditional problem that you see where we have, in this example, we have a list of data which is visible in tab 1. When I go to tab 2, I want the same data to show, but if I change it in tab 2, I want the data to be reactive and then show up in tab 1. So in Angular, you can handle it with a service, you can handle it with observables. In React, you can handle it with a state manager, you can handle it with React hooks. In Vue, you can also handle it with a state manager called VueX, which I discussed in my previous video, which I'll put a link below. But another way to manage it is to create a composable, and inside the composable have reactive objects that get passed back. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video. So please make sure you like and subscribe. Please post any questions if it's not clear to you. And let's get to it right now. All right, so first let's walk through what we've done already. I'm trying to minimize a lot of the Ionic stuff. I'll talk to you about what it is, but then we'll jump into the concept. So what we have is a basic Ionic app generated from the CLI. We'll just walk through the basics. You have your normal setup. Make sure you include Ionic Vue. Make sure you include the router. Let's take a quick look at the router because it's a little bit different with tabs. So what we're doing here is we're saying the default path, redirected tabs path. Here's the tabs path, which will load the tabs component. And then for each one of the paths in there, tab 1 and tab 2, we will load the specific component for tab 1 and a specific component for tab 2. So that's the tabs. And then if we go into tab 1, it's your basic Ionic page, header, full screen, and we're listing some data out. Import my components. Remember, to avoid the errors, you want to make sure that you also specify the components that you're using in your page. We are using use router to get access to the router. Here's the ref that is controlling my data. And in this example, what I'm doing when the component is mounted, making a fetch call to this JSON placeholder API to give me back a list of users, which is what you see here. And then we take the response and we convert it to JSON, and then we take that response, and that's what we pass to my data here. Because we are inside of setup, right? Remember, when you're inside of setup, you have to set the value. When you're in the template, you don't. You can just access the data directly. It'll get unwrapped, and then we're taking the item, we're using the ID for the ID, and we're just going to list the email address that's associated. Right now, tab 2 is empty, so tab 1 is where all the action is at. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to show how we can kind of pull this, just how you get access to the data, how you can kind of pull it out of this, out of tab 1, because you want to be able to get access to data in either tab 1 and tab 2. So let's start by creating our composable. So let's just go over here and we will create, I'll just put it to top level. You can put it wherever you might find it. So we're just going to call it a data service. Serve ICE.ts. We're going to stick with TypeScript. We're going to try to be good TypeScript people. And then let's get to the code. So what we want to do with this data service is we want to keep it real simple. The first thing we want to do is we're going to import a ref. Actually, I gotta probably just import ref from Vue, and then we're gonna export default function, and this function it doesn't have any parameters going into it. Right now, all we need to do is just return the data, right? And so let's create our data up here. So our data is going to be const data, which equals ref. We're not going to put the type of the array, and we're going to set the default to null. Okay. So that's all you have to do. Since this joint here, right here, this data is reactive and I'm returning it, what will happen is as it changes, it will force the view to get updated. So now let's go and use our data service. So if I go to tab 1, and what I'm going to do right up here in the top, let's try this. Let's take our unmounted out of here. right? And we're going to go into our data service, and we're going to say in our data service, when you get mounted, go get this data. Let's import this guy. We have to import it there, so we're going to set a data value, and we're going to pass our data value back. So that will happen on mounted. So then let's go back to tab 1, see we don't have any data. Let's do this. Let's say data is equal to, let's import our data service. So import data service, service from, now we got to go up a level, data service. Okay, so now we have our data service, and then from our data service, we want to do this. So we're going to take from our data service the data. So we're going to say data service, call our function, and we get our data back, and then our data is what we pass here. And so let's see, when we run this, what do we get? So see, now we get our data. So what's happening is, very quickly, the important thing to notice is that I have to put my reference on the outside, not inside the function, or every time the function's called, the data will be reset. So the data is out here on the outside when the component is mounted, because let me format this. Because the component will only get mounted once, I take the data, I set my data value here, and now I have access to my data. Right? So now I have access to my data here. Now, when I go to tab 2, I want access to my data in tab 2. So all I need to do is exactly what I did in tab 1. I can just take my data service and I go over to tab 2 and I define it, I import it, and now I have my data service. I return my data right here, and now I have access to my data in my page. And just to quickly show you, we're just going to say data, and let's see, will that dump it for me? See, so here's all my data. So now I know I have it. But what we want to do is we want to show how if I change the data here, it automatically gets updated here. So we're going to cheat. And we are going to, just to make this real simple, we will display the ID. Let's go back to tab 1. Right now, we just have the email. Let's do this. Let's say ID. Let's put a non-binding space. Let's put another one in there. And let's see what we get now. All right, so now we have our IDs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, and then let's go to our tab 2. And we're going to go to tab 2, and what we're going to say is h3 delete item by ID. h3. Well, what do we got? Delete item by ID. Let's kind of clean this up. Class Ion padding. That cleaned it up. Let's go back here. What do we got here? That looks okay. I don't need to put any padding on it. So here we want to delete the item by ID. And so let's do this. Ion. We're going to have to start importing some stuff. An item. Ion. Input. It'll default to a type. V model equals item ID. Let's set the type so we can be sure. Let's set it to a number, and input. It doesn't know about the item ID, so let's go down here in my setup. Let's return item ID, and it's saying it's not defined, so let's go up here and let's do this. Let's say const item ID equals ref. Once again, we're being lazy with our type, so we'll just say any, and we will set this to 0 to start out with. Let's import my ref. Let's just put it in here. IonVue ref. Okay, my errors go away. I have my item. I can change my value. And looks good. Actually, I just thought about something cool to do. Let's do this. Let's say current item, and then we're going to set this to, let's do this, computed. And then we're going to say data to the item ID. Okay, so what we're going to try and do is when I change my item ID here, I want to render what the specific item is here. So if I have an item ID, then get item ID here, and otherwise null. See, is that going to work? And what's complaining? Warning title never used, blah, blah, blah. Must use value to read or write. All right, sorry. I need item ID, value. All right, so we're following instructions here. We need to unwrap this value. Let's see what we get now. Okay, so now let's dump our current item and see what we get for our current item. So let's create another ion. Item here. Oh, I didn't add all my imports. So let's add all of them. Ion, item, ion, input. Item, ion, input. Where are they? So we got our item, ion, input. All right, so now let's see what we got. So we had our numbers, so now let's see. Let's get our current item back in here. So in here, let's do this. We know current item dot email. Current item, let's see. Why is this not working? This is what happens when you try to just do shit. When you try to just do stuff on the fly. Ion item, I thought. I cannot read email of null. So so let's first fix this, because when it's loading, email is null. So let's do that. Okay. Let's get this back. Let's take another look and see what's happening. That's changing. That's changing. This is computed, so if I have a value, then get this value. My hunch is that this is not being treated as a number, that it's coming back as a string. So this computed is getting a little more complicated than I wanted it to be, so that's why I try to just keep it simple and keep it in here, but it looks like that was a reach. So, okay, so we're going to just use the splice. So I think let's just do data.value dot splice, SPLIC, and then we want to splice from the position that we want, which should be, we know it's an off by 1, so it's ID minus 1, and then we just want to take 1. So that's one way to do it if you want to play with the magic. The other way, let's just do it this way now. You could probably also use a filter. So let's put this, could use filter here. This is a note. But we're going to do it this way. And then let's return this function, delete item by ID. And so now we're in tab 2, delete item by ID. And now let's put our button on the bottom. So ion button, and then here's delete item. And then we're going to call click, and then we're going to say delete item, delete let's just use the function since I have it. Here we have delete item by ID. Let's just push it all the way out. And so we're going to delete item by ID, and the ID we want to use is my model. So we can just use item ID, pass item ID in, and item ID will still be a string. So remember, so now let's go down and so I hate how it does that. So let's go into my data service. Item ID here will be a string, right? And I mean, there's probably a cleaner way to do it, but we'll just go through the exact same exercise we had to do down here. We will, actually, let's just clean this up. Let's just parse in -1, so it's clean. So that's the index. All right, so we'll just take this code and we will save that here. Let's go to my data service. We get that same string ID. We will, let's just make this the same item ID. I believe, actually that's interesting. I've never done it like this before. So let's see what happens. I've never really done anything like this. Will this thing be unwrapped, or am I going to get the reference in here? So let's see. So let's go boom, boom, boom. Let's open up the debugger and see what we get. Once again, I'm kind of out here on a limb, live coding this. Oh, I got to put some, let me fix that. Ion button, doesn't like that. B-U-T-T-O-N. Ion button. Ion button. Let's refresh this guy. Okay. 3. Delete item. All right, yes, so it's coming in right. So I am getting my string. Let's step through this part. So I get my ID 2. Let's see. Splice, data value splice, data ID splice is, oh, I said spice, not splice. So let's go back to my data service, SPL, ICE. Let's save this. All right, you know what I just realized? This approach is not going to work because as I start to remove items, actually this whole approach isn't going to work because as I start to remove items from my index, this will not be the right way to get the item. So let's just actually make another function on here. Delete item by ID. Let's make another one. And we're just going to have to use an array. Get item by ID. Set the item ID. And we're just going to do a, so do this, data value, which is the array, find. I think we can just go like this, and we just say, so we just wanted to find the first item. Find the first item where, so and then item.id equals ID. And then up here for the delete item, we need to do a filter. So it's on my array, I want to filter. So return everything where the item doesn't equal the item ID. Okay. So let's just confirm my item. All right, I gotta have to clean up some code here. So we're turning all of our items here. In tab 2, we now need to use get item by item ID. Let's get item by ID. let's go to my data service, get item by ID. I also need to return that function down here. So remember, all of the functions we create and everything we want access to, we have to pass it back. So now let's go back into tab 2, get item by ID. Once we get a computed value, it's not that, then we're going to call my function, get item by ID, and we're going to just pass it in the item value. So all this off by one stuff we can now get rid of. So first, let's see what we got. So, all right, so clearly that function is not working right now. Get item by ID, get item by ID, current item. Who's red? Current item. Property email does not exist on type. Oh. I hate that. Let's get back in here. Oh, so I need to actually do a return. And I also think that this guy is going to return a, so let's do this. And we know we're going to have this down here too. So let's just put it right here. We got to do a return on all of these. Return objects. So I just can do this. Let's take this out of here, and then we should be ready to go. Okay. All right. So now we're getting 6, 7, 8. See when I handle the error? Yeah, it's getting nothing. All right. So now I'm actually finding my right guy or gal based on the ID. So we got what we wanted. The 8, it gives me 8. Okay. So now let's test the delete item button. So what we want to do is we want to say data dot value equal to and that should force data to change, which will change this guy, which will get sent back, which should update the UI. So Sherwood, Rosamund, me, we're trying to delete. So let's click delete item. We get the item ID of 8. Filter, data, we have an array, 8. Let's set a breakpoint here. All right, so this is our new array. 8 is gone. We're assigning our data value to the new array. Let's go back to 1, and 8 is gone. So it updated, deleted. Let's go back to tab 2. There's no 8 anymore. Let's delete number 9. See, we're here. Go. 9's deleted. Switch back to 1. 9's gone. So 7, 8, 9's gone. Let's delete 1 last time. One's gone. All right, let's close this and do a final display with everything normal. So let's do a hard reload. So we have a hard reload. We have all of our data. Let's remove our debugs. I mean, clearly you can do some error checking for the IDs and index arrays going out, but we're not doing that. So I did use filter here, so let's remove that. Okay. So let's start off from the beginning. So we have our let's save this. We have our data service, which on mounted loads some data. We then go into tab 1, and in tab 1 we list all the data, which is what we have here. We want to have access to the same data in tab 2. So if we go to tab 2, and we go to tab 2, we then, where is it? We then use our data service, which we have right here. And then from our data service, we pull out a bunch of stuff. So the data is specifically what we want. And then we have the ability to delete an item by ID and get an item by ID. So we're doing the get the item by ID to create this current item, which is what we render here. So if I set my ID to 1, we render the current item here. So current item email based on the input, which is this item ID, and that's how to get the value. Okay. Then what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to delete the item that is selected here. So to do that, I call my delete item function. My delete item function I got from my data service. And I'm just filtering the array, removing the item that matches, and resetting my data value. So I delete the item 4, I go back, and you will see ID 4 is gone. So we're sharing data between the two tabs, managing it in what in what Vue calls a composable, or a hook, or an Angular A service. And this data value is not responsive, I'm getting my terms mixed up, is reactive. So when this value gets updated here, all the people who are accessing it, so it's being accessed here in tab 1 to render this automatically gets updated. And then you noticed in tab 2, when I delete the item, it clears out here because the item automatically gets updated. So I kind of bounced around a bit, but the basic idea here is that you can use these Vue composables to create your service to manage your data, and they can be very specific. So this one is specific about managing that list of information. It's just other lists of information. You can have composables that can manage them. Like I said, it's a way to manage state and share that state information across your application and have the values get updated automatically. Please make sure you like and subscribe. I hope you like this video. I will include more links about composables, and I will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.